Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this extremely significant discussion on the thematic day of food, agriculture and water. My name is Amelia Stewart. I work for the World Food Programme. I'm in their climate change team. And today we'll have a session with our wonderful esteemed speakers, which will focus on ramping up climate action and finance for food security in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So this event has been jointly organised by WFP, by FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, and IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So the three UN agencies focusing on food security. And what we are trying to do is provide a platform for discussion on collaborative efforts to foster resilient food systems and enhance food security in a changing climate. So we know that the climate crisis is one of the leading causes of the steep rise in global hunger. Last year, over 72 million people were pushed into emergency levels of hunger due to climate extremes. This was a 26% increase on the previous year. And as we come to the end of what will be underlined as the hottest year on record, climate shocks are predicted to become more frequent and more intense, and will inevitably have more devastating consequences. These climate shocks destroy lives, crops, livelihoods, and are undermining people's ability to feed themselves. And in fragile settings in particular, over 70% of people rely on agriculture and food-based livelihoods. And yet this climate-related funding that's so greatly needed for food and agricultural systems remains insufficient and is even decreasing. However, today we are here to talk about solutions. There are so many crucial, significant, effective things that are actually being done already, both at local level and at national level, and we're here to showcase just a few of them. And so yes, we'll move to this for our panel discussion, but before we move to the panel, I'd like to first introduce our speaker who will give opening remarks, Ms. Dina Saleh, who is the Regional Director for the Near East, North Africa and for Europe for IFAD. So over to you, Dina, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia, and good afternoon, everyone. And I want to first thank our Rome-based agency sister organizations for organizing and convening us, and also to OCHA and all the sponsors for the hosting us in this very, I would say, beautiful and actually spacious venue. It's both a privilege and a necessity for IFAD to be here today to address an urgent shared challenge, the intersection of climate resilience, food security, and fragility. As you heard from Amelia, we are witnessing the unprecedented climate shocks, and conflicts are no longer isolated threats, but intertwined drivers of acute food insecurity, poverty, and instability. As we speak, climate crises are displacing livelihoods and communities in fragile regions. According to the latest WFP FAO Hunger Hotspots report, over 282 million people across 59 countries are now facing acute hunger. The 2024 Global Report on Food Crisis tells us that climate-driven shocks are among the primary drivers of this crisis, affecting over 72 million people across 18 countries, including regions in protracted crisis. This transcends boundaries, impacting the fragile regions even more, and where resilience is most desperately needed and hardest to achieve. Ladies and gentlemen, the numbers speak volumes. International adaptation finance flows are less than 1% of the trillions of climate finance that flow. In 2021, while 21 billion was mobilized for climate adaptation, the 10 most fragile states received only 223 million, under 1%. Worse yet, this gap is widening. And while financing needs to grow, adaptation investments are stalling instead of scaling up. Small-scale producers who supply up to 70% of the food in Africa and Asia are essential to our food security, but receive only a fraction of the needed adaptation finance, which is 7 times below even the most conservative estimates. For these smallholders, the stakes are high. Climate change could mean lower yields, higher food prices, and inevitably more hunger, poverty, conflict, and migration. IFAD has a clear mission to implement sustainable climate solutions that foster long-term solutions of inclusion and stability. A flagship example of this is the Joint Sahel program, which we call the SD3C, where IFAD, FAO, and WFP collaborate with governments in 5 countries, Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Senegal, to provide emergency response with long-term development, addressing, of course, the after effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, the conflicts and the climate impacts in vulnerable cross-border areas. In Mali alone, the SD3C has surpassed outreach targets, already reaching over 25,000 households by the midterm. Presently at IFAD, we have exceeded our 40% climate finance target across our portfolio, with about 47%, almost 1.3 billion, channeled into climate change adaptation and mitigation over the past 3 years. And we would like this to rise to over 1.8 billion in our next cycle, which is 2025-2027. In IFAD, we are accredited to the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environment Facility, and the Adaptation Fund. And as of December 2022, we mobilized approximately 450 million of these funds in the last 3 years to address climate and fragility and the communities that are most vulnerable. The new replenishment will also strengthen IFAD's role as an aggregator of climate finance, building on the successes of our flagship program, which is the Adaptation for Smallholder Agriculture program, and the newly enhanced, what we call the ASAP Plus program. This will allow us to scale up even further. But let's be clear, closing the adaptation gap requires private capital. Current estimates suggest that transforming food systems to be sustainable, equitable, and resilient will cost an additional 300 to 400 billion annually, far beyond what ODA can provide. Expanding resilience in fragile settings isn't easy, and we face several key obstacles. Accessing climate finance, while climate-related development banks has increased and financing has increased by 65% since 2015, only a fraction reaches extremely fragile contexts. Without significant financial flows to these areas, sustainable climate action remains limited where it's needed most. There are also capacity constraints. Fragile situations often lack the governance structures to manage and sustain climate resilience projects. Building community-level capacity is going to be vital for these areas to withstand climate and conflict stresses. There is also the complexity of coordination. Addressing multifaceted issues of climate and food security requires cohesive action among humanitarian, development, and peace actors. Each of these sectors has strengths, but fragile contexts demand a holistic, coordinated approach to avoid the duplication and also to maximize impact. All these are also compounded by the geographical and operational constraints we face. Smallholders are often in remote or conflict-prone areas, which face limited access to markets, infrastructure, and essential services, further isolating them from support. And they also bear the brunt of the climate fragility nexus, where climate shocks intensify competition over resources, fueling fragility. Adaptation efforts often lack the integrated mechanisms to address these crises, limiting their effectiveness and scalability. Despite these obstacles, the COP28 Declaration on Climate Relief, Recovery and Peace marked a milestone in climate finance, supported by 91 countries and 43 organizations. This declaration introduced a 1.25 billion package to implement climate resilience and adaptation solutions in fragile areas, a powerful example of collaborative resilience efforts. Despite these challenges, IFAD is seeing promised trends in building resilience. We're leveraging innovations like ICT 4D, climate information services, and climate insurance, alongside climate-smart agriculture and nature-based solutions. Building knowledge around resilience to climate and fragility shocks is essential, and two strategies have shown particular promise. Blended financing. By de-risking private sector investments, we're able to attract greater climate finance into fragile regions, enabling sustainable long-term adaptation solutions and reducing resilience on emergency relief. This collaboration extends beyond financing, and it also allows us to enhance the local knowledge and support capacity building. Through public-private producer partnerships, what we call the 4P, IFAD leverages the expertise and resources of private actors to create inclusive, scalable solutions that empower rural communities, even in the most isolated areas. Ultimately, we look to alleviating poverty and improving access to nutritious and sustainable food. Another example is the Africa Rural Climate Adaptation Finance Mechanism, a joint IFAD-GCF initiative, and is one such example. With 150 million, this ARCAFIM blends public and private capital with a risk-sharing mechanism and technical assistance, which channels climate adaptation finance to poor rural communities in Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. But ladies and gentlemen, nothing can be done without a community-based approach, and community-driven solutions remain at the heart of what we do. By engaging local actors in the design and implementation ensures that solutions are contextually relevant and supported by the community. Local participation also addresses the last mile problem in fragile areas where state presence is often weak. This participatory approach strengthens ownership and bolsters resilience from the ground up. We have several examples in Sudan, in Somalia, and in many other fragile countries in the Middle East, in Asia, and also in Latin America. So looking ahead, our commitment as IFAD, as Rome-based agencies, as the international community is clear. To effectively support the world's most vulnerable communities, we propose 3 actionable steps. Strengthening local capacity and knowledge. Prioritizing climate finance for fragile contexts with dedicated funds reaching smallholders and food insecure communities facing severe climate shocks. And supporting local institutions to create the policy frameworks and adaptation plans to help attract international finance. We're also looking at investing in resilient agri-food systems and inclusive decision-making. We need sustainable agri-food systems which are essential for food security, especially in fragile situations. Prioritizing projects that directly fund rangeland restoration, climate-smart agricultural practices, and drought-resistant crops is essential. And equally important is an inclusive approach to decision-making which integrates the rural communities, especially women and youth, into governance processes. This inclusive model strengthens the ownership and ensures adaptation solutions are both relevant and sustainable. We also want to call for enhancing strategic partnerships. Collaboration amplifies impact, especially in fragile contexts where food security and climate vulnerabilities intersect. Working with, again, our Rome-based agency partners, and within the global network against food crisis, a pivotal platform for addressing crisis collaboratively, I think we will better align with the HDP Nexus and will be able to leverage data-driven joint assessments, pool resources, apply blended finance, and employ risk-sharing mechanisms to address both immediate needs and systemic risks in agri-food systems. To conclude, ladies and gentlemen, as we convene here at COP29, the urgency of our task is undeniable. IFAD is committed to empower the most vulnerable communities, but we need to all work together. We need to stand together and to be able to champion the causes of these vulnerable communities. Under IFAD 13, we aim to increase our climate resources to 45% by 2030. And this aligns with our work in biodiversity and climate resilient agriculture. Now is the time to move beyond words and to act. Let us commit to empowering those most vulnerable through partnerships, through tools, through resources, so that they can thrive and build their own resilient food systems in today's unprecedented polycrisis world. Thank you, and with that, I'm sure we will have an exciting panel to bring this to life. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dina. That was fascinating, and thank you for covering so much, but especially drawing attention to the fact that we need integrated solutions, especially when we have such limited funding, and about locally driven cohesive action really being one of these key ways of implementing these solutions. So without further ado, let me turn now to our esteemed speakers, and I'll introduce you one by one of them. To my left, we have Dr. Mohamed Abdi Farah, who is the Senior Advisor for Food Systems, Nutrition and Climate Change, the Office of the Prime Minister, Federal Republic of Somalia. Then we have Ms. Violet Shivutse, who is the Chair of the Huairu Commission, Founder and Director of the Shibuye Community Health Workers. Then we have Dr. Balgis Osman Elisha, who is the Chief Climate Specialist and Regional Coordinator at the African Development Bank. And then Ms. Safa Josi, who is the Regional Climate Justice Advisor for the MENA region at Oxfam. Thank you very much for being here today. Let's begin with you, Dr. Farah. So, as you know so well, Somalia is very familiar with the impacts of climate change, especially over the last 5 years. And it would be great if you could share some reflections with us on what Somalia is doing to avert and minimize losses and damages occurred to lives, livelihoods, and food systems. And how do you ensure that these solutions are conflict sensitive and also implementable at the local level? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me and to be part of this very notable panelists and discussions. In fact, needless to say that Somalia is one of the countries that is negatively and badly affected by the climate change. We have cycles of floods and droughts which do not give a time to breathe and prepare for recovery. In fact, for the last few years, we have been experiencing a lot of cyclic changes that are really opposite to each other. A flooding which ends up with a very dry drought that kills human beings, and at the same time destroys infrastructures and lives as well. And this is needless to say that everybody understands it. Despite these challenges, in fact, the country is struggling with other human-created effects, which includes internal conflict, extremism, and weak governance, as well as institutional capacity, which is very much limited. Combined to all this, makes Somalia very vulnerable and in a state of ability to respond to those becomes very much limited with the infrastructures and capacity that is there in the country. However, the government had really done a lot to make institutions that will be able to respond to those. To start with, Somalia had first time established the Environment and Climate Change Ministry, which was just a directorate before this government. and it was scaled up into a ministry level, which makes that the government is committed to responding and feeling the need for climate change effects. And at the same time, the government had established an agent that is specialized for response into the humanitarian crisis and due to climate change and others as well, which is called Somalia Disaster Management Authority, which is looking after and responding, preparing for humanitarian crises that are related to climate, which are related to other agencies as well. And as we also know, the humanitarian response plan is always cyclic, and every year we have a humanitarian response plan which is prepared. But along with that, Somalia is having a plan which is called Somalia National Development Plan, which has been now converted into the Somalia National Transformation Plan, which means making it more aggressive to respond to the needs and build the resilience of the communities. And instead of having plan, we are going to have initiatives, programs, and implementable actions that can respond to the needs of the population in response to the humanitarian crisis caused by the climate shocks that are cyclically happening. But combined to all these efforts, plus the efforts of our partners from UN agencies, from donors, from friendly countries that are around us, it looks like Somalia is not in a position to respond fully to the effect of climate change. And this goes back into the ability to finance those responses, which is really very much limited. Somalia is one of the countries affected by the conflict. At the same time, access to climate finance becomes a challenge majority of the times. As many other countries in the conflict-affected third world or south part of the world, it is incredibly difficult for Somalia to access those funds. And also accepting that adaptation funds were also already limited compared to mitigation funds. Those limited funds itself coming to the country is again becoming an issue and responding to the actual needs of the population who are affected by those. And what really would be very ideal would be that Somalia would build infrastructures, would build capacities and coping capacities of the populations in a way that we really say what we mean by resistance, what we mean by restoration of lives, by what we mean to safeguard lives that have been lost daily due to the climate effects. So my last message would be, sorry, taking a long time. My last message would be to those countries that are around us who are really responsible for the devastating effects of climate. Somalia contribute is very negligible or zero level to the green gas emissions. And yet, Somalia is hosting the highest burden. So we need to have justice, we need to have equity, we need to have human rights, and we need to have saying that what other world which is causing the devastation is saying, they should stand for that and be able to give access Somalia to those funds which can now save lives due to the climate change and climate hazards. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. No, it's, I mean, you really so eloquently summarized, there are so many fantastic initiatives that the government is working on, but without the climate financing to actually be able to implement them, this is a big gap that needs filling. And you also highlighted, as so many of us know, one of the reasons that we're all here is really to draw attention to those who are dealing with the impacts of climate change, living on the front lines, who have really contributed the least to its the causes. So thank you very much for that. I'd now like to turn to Ms. Shivuse. So we'll go from a national level to a more local level community perspective. So we know that smallholder pastoralists are among those most severely affected by the impacts of climate change. But we also that policies and programs don't often always consider the diverse context in which these communities are operating, especially when it comes to the significance of women and their role in climate action. So, based on your experience, how is the role of women a critical factor in food system transformation?
Thank you so much. My local group is called Shibuya Community Health Workers from Kenya and is a member of Wairu Commission, a global movement of grassroots women-led organizations. As grassroots women, most of us come from the background of caregiving, especially in Africa because of the HIV/AIDS, which struck many homes, leaving many orphans in the hands of elderly grandchildren. So we started organizing from that concept of ensuring care. When you talk about care, food security is really at the center of that. And it's not just food security, because some of these children that are left are very young and they require also nutrition. You cannot just give them any food, and the elderly people. So it's from this basis that we started organizing as grassroots women in 13 countries in Africa and in 7 countries in Asia. So if I give my own example, one of the issues of the groups in Kenya have been facing initially was access to land and also access to policymakers. So for us to be able to address this issue, we looked at different ways of how women access land that is promoted. One is buying land, very expensive. Women may not buy land, especially at the grassroots level. The succession process, which may take forever, and you need food at that particular time. So you cannot be able to sit and wait until the succession process has been completed. So we came up with one way that we saw was working, which women were using, which is called land leasing. However, the government has not streamlined land leasing. It's only streamlined land leasing for the bigger multinationals that lease land for 100 years. But the small land leasing has not been factored. So women go to land leasing, then they are likely to lose because of conflicts, lack of agreements. So we streamlined land leasing with a community process called, streamlining community-driven land lease guidelines, which these land lease guidelines worked very well. In 1 year, we saw the number of women that were accessing land, the number of women that were engaged in rehabilitating land. We had 270 acres rehabilitated in 1 year that were being changed to become agricultural land. So from this, and we did a very big adoption. They increased number of food security at household level. Women were engaged even in feeding these families that were really vulnerable, contributing food at the center. So we gave this example of the process to the government. And the government looked at it and adopted it, so it became a county government land leasing procedure that had been developed by women. So this shows how women are actually key and how women can actually come up with innovations and bring everyone in, ensuring that access to land. That was not enough. We still looked at how do we access policymakers, because in Kenya, decentralized government system is the one that handles agriculture. And for women to access money for agriculture, small grants, and even access or influence policy priorities, they need to work with the county government. But every time we had to keep knocking doors at the beginning of every new county official that has been elected to go and introduce ourselves. So we came up with a process that we call the Governor's Day with Farmers. And we as women, we pulled all these farmers organizations together and said, we want you to join us so that we can have an institutionalized way on how we meet the governor. On this day, we come up with our declaration, the things that we need the governor to speak about. We also bring many women on board to give their priorities, and we speak to the governor directly than the regular way. So these two initiatives have really moved on how we are interacting with the governor. We have even put these land lease guidelines to be put in the county integrated development plan. Our priorities are usually followed and put in the county integrated plan. But again, we ask ourselves at the end of every governor's day, what is it that we need to do more? we realize in 2 years that even as it goes to the county integrated plan, sometimes it doesn't reach the table of the annual budget. So again, we said, now when we take it to the county integrated plan, we need to ask the governor, how are we going to ensure that these things have been funded? So now we got also a liaison person in the county government that the governor gave us to ensure that these things also are put in the annual budget and budgeted for. And there is a total way of how we evaluate and give impact of every governor's day, what is it delivering. So with this, I just want to say that women are key. Women are also developing innovations. Women can participate in policy. Most of the time we feel that women at the grassroots level do not understand policy in their own level. And this is how we can advance the role of women in agriculture, both in practice and also in policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is fascinating and yeah, I mean, such an insight into so many of these very important initiatives, land leasing, this Governor Day, as you said, and having somebody on the inside of the policy process helping really drive things forward, as well as having these community voices, supplying the intel. Fantastic. Thank you. So now we'll turn to Dr. Elisha. So zooming out a bit from a regional perspective. So the African Development Bank has been a great advocate of food security interventions generally, from many different things, including nature-positive solutions, ensuring food and nutrition security in some of the most fragile settings. So could you give us some examples of the current projects that you're working on and others that you would like to see further investment in order to scale it up? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me to this important topic. As you know, the natural resources and conflicts and fragility are closely linked and interconnected. This is well established, and especially in countries where there is high dependence on natural resources. The case in many African countries, especially Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. Yeah. So, and more, the idea of the linkage between peace building and sustainable management of natural resources are becoming evident. They are mutually reinforcing, they are interdependent, and if through sustainable management of natural resources, we can put the foundation for peace building. But for doing this, we need a lot of resources because this process spans multiple dimensions. It is environmental, economic, social, governance, institutional, and to address fragility and vulnerability across all these dimensions, you need resources, whether human resources, technical, financial, and also we need technological solutions. So this is the role of the bank here, because the bank identifies the gap and the need for those fragile states or states in transition for building peace and also developing sustainable development. And we started a number of initiatives, some of them at the strategic level, others are operational level. For the strategic level, the bank developed the fragility strategy 2020 to 2026. And let me just show you the pillars of the strategy. It has three main pillars: strengthening institutional capacity, because we know the impact of the conflicts on institutions. It weakens institutions and deplete capacities. That is why it's very important to start by building institutions. The second pillar is building resilient societies, and this is also because of the depletion of the human capital. We know that the conflicts bring, disintegration of society, sometimes even complete collapse of social systems. The third pillar is catalyzing the private investment, also because the depletion of the capital asset. Besides that, the bank developed a number of initiatives. The first one is the Transition Support Facility, which provides catalytic funding beyond the concessional and non-concessional instrument to countries facing fragility and conflict. It operates in a flexible way, and it creates paves the way for partnership, because also addressing issues related to conflicts need partnership and collaboration. Since its establishment in 2008, the Transition Support Facility mobilized over $7 billion to support investment and institutional projects in the low-income African countries. These resources have enhanced the ability of fragile states to attract additional development assistance, private investment, and diaspora capital. The second initiative is the program to build resilience to food and nutrition insecurity in the Sahel, started in 2015 to 2021. It is 165 million initiative. They mentioned to enhance resilience and food security across 8 Sahelian countries: Burkina Faso, Chad, Gambia, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Senegal, and Chad, benefiting 180,000 farms and small and medium enterprises. It improves the nutrition of almost 500,000 mothers and children and boosted agricultural productivity. Then there is the African Climate Smart Agriculture Program, started in 2017. It aims to help 100 million farmers adopt climate smart practices by 2025, restoring 35 million hectares of degraded land and mobilize over 1 billion climate resilient agriculture. Then we have the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, AAAB. This is a joint initiative with the Global Center on Adaptation and the African Development Bank, and it seeks to mobilize $25 billion by 2025 for climate adaptation in Africa. Its pillars include scaling up digital agriculture technologies, climate resilient infrastructure, youth-led enterprises, and innovative finance. And one of these projects has recently been launched in South Sudan. It's called Climate Resilient Food Security and Agriculture Transformation Project, abbreviated as CRAFT. It is a landmark initiative aimed to sustain agricultural productivity and enhance food security using climate adaptive production systems, including advanced seed varieties and efficient irrigation systems, strengthening the value chain, and empowering women-led initiatives and youth also. Then we have the Climate Action Window. We call it COW, and we have started milking it now. Yeah, it's these countries for low-income countries also in Africa, and it has three windows. Adaptation is the highest, 75%, mitigation 15%, and 10% for technical assistance. The call for proposal is open now for the 10% to develop project proposal that can facilitate the mobilization of additional resources. Then we have many others, but I'm not going into that. But I just want to emphasize the importance of partnership, and in this regard, the bank has created a number of partnerships. For example, one with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, to improve the analysis of the drivers of fragility and promote resilience. And also another initiative, partnership with the International Committee of Red Cross to address issues of humanitarian and development challenges. And then with Interpeace, this Swiss-based enterprise for peace building and also for creating finance for peace. In conclusion, sustainability lies at the heart of our efforts at the African Development Bank. This strategic partnership, innovative solutions, and scaled investment, the bank has created lasting impacts in fragile settings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I wish we had more time. These conversations are so interesting, but inevitably we're, against the clock. But no, fascinating to hear about all that the bank is doing, from building capacity, resilience of societies, technology, innovations. I'm sure if people would like to follow up on the South Sudan project afterwards, that would be very interesting. So over to Safa. Thank you so much. So you've been a long-time advocate for climate justice. And I even read an article of yours from last year that highlighted that countries, communities and people are being affected by climate change in such different ways and at different levels, which I think is very key for our conversation today as well. So could you give us a few examples of this in the work that you do and some solutions that you're implementing? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation as well, and this very nice venue. One example is that when we talk to farmers in Syria and Iraq and in other areas, we hear that they don't move because of the unrest. They move and they become displaced sometimes because of lack of water, extreme weather events, extreme drought, and also the changing of the weather patterns. And this is, we see a lot. And climate change does make the weather events more extreme. But also it makes people on the move and it forces them to be moved from one place to another. This also put a lot of pressure on women who usually get responsible for everything, and men moves to other cities and they change jobs as well. So from our experience as Oxfam, community-based projects are the key. If we want to really change patterns, if we want really to support farmers' community, we need to have funding directly given to the farmers and to communities. Even if we want to change the current system, because some donors are saying that giving funding to IFCAS, to fragile contexts, it's very hard because of some areas are not controlled by the government, etc., and those issues that we know. But even if it's a smaller portions of money, it's still worth it because we've seen it on the ground. Giving farmers funding to combat climate change, to overcome climate change, whether it was smart agriculture, reviving nature-based adaptation, indigenous knowledge, and indigenous ways of farming that we have it in the MENA region. And for us, especially in the region, we depend on farming a lot. This has shown that it can also reduce civil unrest. It can reduce conflict because they can overcome the climate change impact that is hitting really, really hard in the region and in the global south in general, which, as my colleagues said here in the panel, we didn't even contribute as a historical emitter in the climate change impact that we are witnessing and seeing it today. So climate finance to fragile context is a key, and climate finance for the communities is the key. And climate finance to the most vulnerable and indigenous people is a key to overcome climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. Thank you to everyone on the panel. That's wonderful. Thank you. Well, I hope that we could squeeze in about 10 minutes of Q&A. Maybe we might need a couple more microphones for this. Okay, super. Yes. Well, we can also pass it around. Oh, yes, we have somebody at the front, actually. So over to you.
Thank you so much for all the presenter. My name is Fatima Ahmed. I'm from Sudan. I'm representing or president of Grassroots Women Organization, women-led organization called Zainab for Women Development Organization. I really just want to agree with my sister from Kenya. What she has said, the experience is almost exactly. Also, we have it with the women farmers at grassroots level. It's the same organizations, the same innovation. Women has to lease. We help the women to organize in women farmers associations. This is program started in 2007, and through that one, women first rent. We help them to rent like 10 hectares of land, and they work on it as association, as group. And from that, it's now been very popular and very common, and women own land, women, not all of them definitely, but I want to say it is a success story, and it really works. But the issue is, how can we get those resources? Because women at grassroots level, women-led organization, they know what to do for this action. So this is very important. And the peace building. Now we have chaos in our country, and sorry to pray for what's going on. And now the women lost even lands in many areas in Sudan. And this is really also something related. It has to be peace, or it has to be related to peace building. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure we can all agree that it's exceptionally important. I think this gentleman at the... Oh, does anyone have a question rather than a statement? Okay, maybe this gentleman, the pinstripe, and then we'll go to you. And then
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the discussion. One point I totally agree with is the people are displaced because of the climate-induced factors, then conflict. But my question is looking at now in terms of the programming, what is the percentage of women who have been supported with the climate financing in Africa? Looking at particularly the conflict-affected countries like Somalia, where there are over 4 million internally displaced people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would any of you have any... I mean, it's not my area of expertise, but if anyone has any insight into this, I mean, I'm sure UNHCR or IOM colleagues would be able to help direct you on this particular question. But it's a very crucial one. Thank you.
At the African Development Bank, we make sure that every project, like at least 50% should go to women. So, but I can't give you a figure. But this is like, we have now a gender marker, which is used to identify the contribution of women, and the project cannot be bought unless there is 13%. So, yeah. And then we have programs which is targeting women, like AFAWA for Western Africa. That is for women in agriculture. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add one point to that. In general, what African Development Bank, World Bank, or other banks pledge or plan actually is associated with a lot of progresses that end up women or affected populations receiving funds after they have lost everything they had or they had already suffered. So it's a long journey. In fact, it's starting from the African Development Bank and their plan, going into a UN agency or going into a government, Ministry of Agriculture, and then moving into a community level, and until it reaches that woman who has been affected by the climate change. What she understands is, how can I adapt to it? How can I revive my business? How can I run my farm? That is actually what she needs to answer and answer for. But a lot of progress are involved into it, and a radical change is really needed to be able to reach communities on time, or what they need exactly at that time. And the closest people can be implementers and agencies that are close to them, and reaching that adaptive finance to those people is really a paramount for responding to this.
I just want to add one more point, is that in our analysis as Oxfam, like 2 million people, a quarter of the humanity, are living in a heavy debt countries, and they are in the fragile context, and they should not get any more climate finance in terms of debt. Since it's the climate finance COP, it's good to also focus on this since we are here all, that climate finance going to fragile context should be in the form of grants and should not add more pressure to those communities who are already suffering and, as you said, who have lost almost everything. So climate finance should be also conflict transformative, just like climate transformative interventions that we are doing.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to turn to this gentleman here that had a question. Do you still have a question? Okay. Microphone behind you.
Okay, thank you so much for the panelists. And I just have one question. I'm from Kenya. One of the hardest thing with farmers and especially women, I'm speaking this because I'm also a farmer, it's not just access to land. There are a lot of other issues of sustainability, of women running their own businesses from year to year and making their own money out of businesses. So how have you been able to do a sustainability measure for them to make money? For us, our organization have been able to give them cattle and sheep because they're in their pastoralist areas and they have free land for community land and they get milk and they can sell their offspring. So I wanted to get some of the good practices that you have been doing probably in Kenya and those in other areas for us to adapt. Thank you.
Okay, I want to say that in Wairu Commission gave money to organizations in Kenya, and this money is from the Dutch, the Powerful Voice, through Oxfam Novib. With this money, in some of the areas where women are going through hardship of access to water, like Kajiado, the women themselves proposed, we will not be part of the agriculture initiatives, but that does not mean we don't want money. We will use our money to do the beads. You know, the Maasai women do the beads. And then we still looked at the beads as their value chain, and we were able to support them in the process of how do you use the beads to support critical mass of women to work together, share knowledge, do value addition on the beads, be able to access market, and even engage with policymakers. But at the same time, use the time to also look at other innovations on how you can learn from the other groups to do vegetable with little water and whatever. So there has been cross-learning and the women are really doing well. And we had a very big event where the women were showcasing how the beads had really worked for them in providing food to the table during the long drought season. So we are integrating that. But they are also they have just developed a county plan on vegetable because they have seen from the other groups how you can do vegetable with little water through sack gardening and whatever that they have given to the county. So there is cross-learning in that. Thank you. And we are not funders. Thank you. We are just grassroots organization doing mentorship to each other, peer learning. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I think we only have time for one more, and I know this lady was very keen, so maybe actually. And then we need to move to our closing remarks, but please stay afterwards and we can ask as many questions as you can manage.
Hi, I'm Suranjana from the Wairu Commission. We're the same network as Violet, but I think what I want to say is that, yes, I agree very much with the lady from Oxfam who talked about grant-based financing. I think that's vital, especially where the poor are concerned. I think what we see in terms of the solutions emanating from very grassroots organizations, urban, rural, indigenous, are all based on a huge investment in organizing women collectively, federations, cooperatives, and so on. And I want to know what financial institutions are doing to support and sustain these kinds of organizing processes in order to build and sustain and scale up the technical work that goes on around solving climate-related issues. Thanks.
This is one for Dr. Alicia, if you want to say anything in response, or up to you.
Okay, thank you. Because he mentioned the need to act early before it's not after, before. And I think this the strategy, the fragility strategy, has this preventative approach, trying to address the root causes so that we'll avoid like future conflicts. And I believe we need to put the foundation for lasting peace so that it will not repeat. Because most of the countries, fragile states, they have been through like cycles of conflicts. So it is not like once, unless you address the root causes, it comes again and again. This is like becoming a chronic condition. So we need to build strong institutions. We need to strengthen our governance system. Beside like development, of course, sustainable development. These are like the foundation for lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone. And I'm sorry we're out of time, but I'm just going to hand over to Sylvie Wabs, who is a resilience advisor at FAO, who'll give some closing remarks.
Well, closing remark. What can I say? I think we've heard from the leaders, we've heard from the community extraordinary work. We've heard from the finance approach, how they're putting communities, nature, prevention, adaptation at the center, making sure climate actions are conflict sensitive as much as possible, but also recognizing that investing in people and trusting the agency of local actors, local women, local communities, trusting that they can act as the leaders of change, the leaders to address and tackle climate change. This is really the fundamental approach that we need, especially in these fragile settings. A process of trust and inclusivity, engaging with the community leaders, putting them at the center of any design, planning, strategy, policy, and large finance. This is very, very critical. And blending the actions from humanitarian actors, helping to respond to the emergency needs, but also the longer-term need, bringing the finance actors, the development actors, the climate actors, to address some of the root causes of fragility and climate vulnerability. This blending, this dialogue, like what we've been having today, which showcased quite a number of solutions, this is critical in the way forward. What we're trying to do as FAO, but also together with the Rome-based agency and with our finance partners, is to try to advocate for a portfolio of solutions so that we cluster these best solutions in terms of climate-proofing infrastructure, nature-based solution, climate services, early warning systems, social protection, insurance, community capacities in their resilience to prevent, anticipate, absorb, and adapt to the multitude of climate shocks and stresses. These are all the sort of solutions that need to be bundled together without the silo of humanitarian development, climate and finance and peace actors, bringing these together so that we can really address the climate crisis first, but that is bringing the stable factor, stabilization and peace conducive for a better future for all. I cannot add more. Enough has been said. Let's continue this conversation together and make sure that climate action are always conflict sensitive. Thank you very much.